background is I was formerly a staff attorney for a nonprofit planning organization headquartered in Portland called 1000 Friends of Oregon. And being an attorney, my job was to take, who to court. And I did that for a while and it was fun. But then I got involved in policy, and then I got involved in transportation policy and transportation research. And I stopped really being at least a lawyer in court. And that was a good thing, I think, for the world. I have been here at the University of Utah since 1998. And so I am, when I look around my department and my college, I am the old guy, which is a shock to me. If that hasn't happened to you yet, it's one of those things that happens over time. It's just, the clock keeps turning. I want to introduce a couple people that are involved with this class that you'll be seeing in various guises and doing various things around the class. The first person I want to introduce you to is Matt Ryan. Matt, you want to wave from Margaritaville there? Yeah, Matt has the greatest screen background there. I get lost sometimes in the middle of meetings just watching the fronds go by and the waves and trying to think warm thoughts. Matt is a first-year master's student in our Master of City and Metropolitan Planning program. And he comes to us from Westminster College, where he was a major in marketing. And so we are pleased to have Matt working with us. Matt also is a master gardener. He has been in the employ of Red Butte Garden for a number of years. So we look to Matt for inspiration on margaritas and for plant advice and gardening advice, and also for his work as the TA for this class. And so you'll be hearing from and seeing Matt around, if assuming you haven't already. The other person I'd like to introduce to you right off the bat is Nathan McNeil. Nathan is a research associate at Portland State University. I know Nathan from years past. As I said, I used to live in Portland, and it was Nathan's idea for this class. This class, as you may have heard about or read about, is inspired by a similar class that has been offered in Portland for now 30 years. That's really shocking because I remember when it started. I was living in Portland when it started. There's that aging thing again. This class was the idea of a member of the city council who's now been a member of Congress for, I don't know, at least a generation. And it was his idea to get a class involved or organized that would bring people from the community to work together to educate themselves on activism in transportation and that some of the more technical aspects of transportation. And the Portland transportation class, it's gone by several different names now, is now well regarded throughout the country as a model of community engagement, a way of getting people involved with their communities, the decision makers in their communities who are planning for and making the decisions on transportation improvements in their neighborhoods. And so I've been in awe of that class forever and thought, boy, we should do something like that here in Salt Lake City. And it was Nathan's idea to actually make that happen. So Nathan, you want to chime in and say hello to everyone?
Yeah, well, I'm glad to see such great attendance here and that you guys are excited for this course. And it's been a big success here in Portland. The alum have grown to be, amongst the decision makers here in Portland and people that are working on this issue and advocates around town. And just excited to be here to see it start to happen, I hope, and see where it goes from here. So yeah, thanks.
So Nathan is our resident expert on this class. So whenever something, goes haywire or we don't know what to do, we will do the lateral, the shout out to Nathan for advice, and I'm sure that'll probably happen before the end of the evening. To help get us started here, I'm going to bring someone in to also welcome you and to kind of kick us off. And this person is well known to our department and to me personally, and this is Laura Hanson. Laura Hanson is the State Planning Coordinator for the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget. A position that she's been in just a short period of time now, but she was for many years the planning director for the Utah Transit Authority. And so she was UTA's top planner for quite a while. Before that, she was the founding director for the Jordan River Commission. If you're familiar with the Jordan River Commission, it's her idea. She got it going. And before that, she was in the private sector doing community planning and cultural planning for a number of different clients around the Utah area. And so Laura, one last thing, of course, is that Laura is one of our alums. So she has also spent time in our department, and every time that she takes on another fabulous job, we are just shouting from the hilltop her praises and how proud of her we are. And Laura, we've asked Laura to come and kick off this class and get us started here to talk about the importance of transportation to the state of Utah, because transportation is, it's something we all do, but it's also something that we value and that is important to our communities. And we want to ask Laura to maybe share some of her perspective on that.
Thank you so much. I think Keith might be my personal cheerleading section, and I really, really appreciate all of the kind words. So thanks so much, and thank you all for being here. This is great. I see some familiar faces and some new faces, and I'm just delighted that you're all here. I hope you'll bear with me a little bit. I don't have anything too formal or prepared, but I do have a couple notes, so I'm going to flip through them a little bit. But first, I just wanted to talk about the importance of citizen engagement in transportation planning. It is critical to have public feedback in planning projects. As transportation planners, the input from the public really helps us think through the potential impacts of a project. Sometimes there's something that we hadn't even thought of that somebody brings up and says, did you know this causes this challenge for me? And it's like, I didn't even think about that. And typically we try to think through those things, but sometimes we miss things. One thing I personally love about citizen engagement is that sometimes people come up with really creative solutions. Oftentimes, if you've been in the professional planning world for a while, you get a little, there's sort of the standard responses, and you forget sometimes. You're so used to the parameters and the limitations of being in a governmental position that sometimes you forget to think outside of the box. And so our members of the public sometimes will bring really creative ideas that sometimes are really viable. A good example of that actually is in the Little Cottonwood Canyon EIS process, which I know is very controversial. And this particular idea is also hotly debated, but it originated from somebody in the community, which was the idea of locating the gondola base station at a different location. So at the Lukai area, originally it was proposed to be somewhere else. And there are lots of things that you can say about that, but it did come from a member of the public at the time, a well-informed one, but from the public. I think it's also really important to participate because we're here to serve you, right? We're not elected officials, but our job is to serve the public and to make sure that we're making the very best decisions, using public dollars as wisely as possible, and really doing the very best we can for you. Even if sometimes people can be kind of thorns in the side of planners, if you're really squeaky and really adamant, I think there's a place for that and a role for that as well. And so if you find yourself kind of the bomb thrower of the community, you know what, know that we appreciate you. Sometimes it's hard and it's challenging to work through that, but you make us dot our I's and cross our T's and anticipate questions and think through things. And so it's really, really helpful. The last thing that I would say is that there is absolutely nothing worse than putting a ton of effort into planning a public exercise, a public meeting, a public open house, some sort of input collection method, and nobody shows up, or we get very, very little feedback. It's disheartening because it's like, oh, maybe people don't really care. They don't think this work's important. But also for all those reasons I listed above, we really value your input. So please participate. So transportation planning is important to the state of Utah for a bunch of reasons. For one, it just keeps us moving, right? It gets you to your work, it gets you to your school, it gets you to recreational areas, to see your friends, to the grocery store. It just helps us participate in society, to doctors' offices, all those things. It keeps our economy moving. So think of all of the delivery trucks that we're seeing on the roads these days as more and more people are shopping online. But in addition to that, think about the plumber or the electrician or the guy who's fixing your windshield that's driving around, or carrying things from one place to another. And it really helps us get to our own jobs, right? There is a huge nexus between transportation planning and land use planning. And I'm guessing that some of the speakers in this class will touch on this in far more detail. So I'm just going to give you just a little appetizer, but think about the types of land uses you see around freeway exits. And then think about the types of neighborhood streets and the land uses that are around neighborhood streets. And then what about the types of land uses you see along kind of major collector roads in your city? And I'm guessing that in each of those examples, you can kind of picture, okay, there's a big box store, and then there's a house, and then there's, like strip malls, and, each of these different transportation types within our community, the way that our network looks, really influences the way that our land use turns out. And it can go the opposite direction as well. So we can change the feel of the street by changing the land use. And so street design really has a lot to do with the livability of a community as well. For those of you who are in Salt Lake County, think about 7th East, for example, and what 7th East looks like, and then think of the 9th and 9th neighborhood. They're very, very different feels. It's much more pleasant to walk along the sidewalk in 9th and 9th. And the land uses are a little bit different, even though there are some of the same. If you live in Utah County, you can think of Center Street compared to University Parkway, or up in Ogden, you can think of the 25th Street versus Washington Boulevard. Really the way that we design our transportation network really changes and affects the way our built environment turns out on the other side. We have some funny social expectations as Americans, I think. We are willing to park in a giant sea of cars at a Costco parking lot and walk a really long distance to get to the door to buy our things in bulk. But parking a half a block away to walk to a little neighborhood store somehow seems insurmountable to us. My in-laws lived in Europe for a while, and they walked everywhere. They walked to the grocery store. As soon as they moved back to the United States, they hopped in the car and they drove to the grocery store. And it was the same distance. It just baffles me. And the part of, I was thinking about this, and I asked them, I'm like, why don't you walk now? And they said, well, we just don't really think about it. But when, it comes down to the urban form and what kind of environment and experience walking is through the community. So that's something to think about. Other cultural things, do we need to drive everywhere? Could we walk? Could we bike? Could we ride transit? Could you rent a car occasionally when you need to? And do you need to drive alone, right? For some reason, we have this, we need to be all by ourselves so nobody will talk to us. It's funny, we could carpool with our colleagues or with our neighbors. And then the last thing that I want to leave you with before I pass it on to people who are much smarter than I am. When you think about transportation planning, I'm guessing the things that come to mind are roads, maybe bicycle lanes and trails, sidewalks, bus routes, rail corridors. But you also ought to be thinking about, when you think about transportation planning, parking lots, alleyways, ADA accessibility, EV infrastructure. And then there's something called travel demand management, which is really all of the ways that we can reduce the demand for people wanting to travel in the first place. And that there's a whole host of tools in that suite. And I'm certain people will talk to you about that as we move on. So expand your horizon. Thank you for being here. Thanks for caring and participating. I hope that you leave this, this course feeling like you are empowered to participate in community planning, transportation planning processes in a way that's effective. You feel like your voice can be heard and incorporated into the processes in a meaningful way, and know that all of us on the government side really, really appreciate your input and for caring about your communities enough to participate. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Keith. Thanks.
Thank you. Applaud or snap, or as your preference is, or wave. That was fantastic, Laura. Thank you for getting us off on such a kind of high note. Really appreciate that. And you're going to hear a lot of kind of emphasis of a lot of the points that Laura just made. One of the things that I think I want to pluck out of her comments right now is the role of the citizen expert. Transportation is about communities, and people who live in communities should have a say in what kinds of transportation come through and feed and support and sometimes burden their communities. And we have created a very slick process for making determinations about transportation. And as we've gotten more technical expertise, we have, as part of the bargain, unintentionally left behind many of the communities that are the kind of the home of all this transportation that we're creating. And so we're looking through efforts like this course to bring that citizen expertise and that voice of citizen expertise back into the conversation in a robust way, so that when we're making decisions, yes, we will be listening to what the experts tell us. I definitely want somebody who is a registered engineer to be designing the street curb next to my house, but I also want other people to have a say in what's happening with that curb and what's happening with that street. Those of you who live in the neighborhood or travel near 100 South know that it's been under construction for quite a long time, and this past summer and much of the fall, and I think they're now done. But that was a project that was a combination of community interest and professional expertise, and those are the kinds of projects that we want to help try to foster and recreate across our communities. So this class is intended to help in that process. Well, what I normally do for my classes is on the first day is I don't talk about the syllabus first thing because I always want to get right to the meat of the topic before we start talking about all the details and what the schedule will be and when you got to get this assignment done and all those other things. Because those details are important, but they're, sorry for the pun, pretty pedestrian. So what I'd like to do with your permission is to jump over that, come back to it in about 15 minutes, and first talk about some of the kind of basic foundations that I think we'll be revisiting throughout the course of the next 8 weeks. And again, Laura's already hit on one of those themes, and that is land use and transportation. And so I'm gonna, of course, I'm a professor, so I can't speak without having some PowerPoint slides nearby. And so I'm gonna shift over to my PowerPoint here and share these slides and see, yep, that worked. And I go full screen here. There we go. And I'm assuming people can see this okay? This is always the question you ask on PowerPoint, on Zoom. Okay, so this is our schedule tonight. we've just come through the intro and welcome. We are now at the second line there on transportation and land use basics. Then I will indeed talk about the syllabus and the schedule. We'll take a break at about 6:55, and then we'll come back and have a guest presentation from Ted Knowlton, the Deputy Director of the Wasatch Front Regional Council on regional transportation planning. Well, I know there's at least 2 people, probably 3 people who have seen this slide before. You would think I would come up with new slides, but this one works so well that I thought I'd just keep it and put it in there and make a couple people smile. Transportation is a lot of things, but when I break it down, it's a combination of technology and changes in technology and how that technology interacts with a land development market. And so on the technological side first, we start with the 3 original forms of transportation, which are walking, moving because of beasts of burden we've convinced to move us there, or moving because we can capture and harness natural forces like the wind to move us where we want to go. That all changed at the close of the 18th century with the development of the first practical steam engine. In the beginning of the 19th century, someone figured out if you put it on a cart with wheels and put it on these pieces of metal, it would make a really cool thing called a locomotive. 1825. So pretty much until 1825, transportation was about what you could do with your feet, what you could do with an animal, what you could do with the wind, since the dawn of time. So that's a pretty long time. And then everything changed in 1825. That technology was imported, because it was originally developed in England, imported into the United States just within 5 years. And we have our first railroad line in Maryland, the Tom Thumb, in 1830. Right about the same time, we've got a whole bunch of people, or at least a whole bunch of European Americans moving across the country to make it to California, Oregon, and some of them stopped along the way in Utah. So in 1862, when Congress adopted the Pacific Railway Act and created the mechanism, really kind of the first nationwide transportation planning effort to create the Transcontinental Railroad. This was important because it recognized not only the fundamental importance of transportation to the region or to the nation's economy, but also what was important about transportation and what would motivate especially private actors, private corporations, to build such an audacious piece of infrastructure. And it wasn't transportation, and it wasn't the promise of profit from moving people or freight on that transportation line. It was land and the ability of those companies to have access to a whole bunch of land. So as some of you may know, when this rail line was first conceived and the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific Railroads were brought in to actually make it happen, what they insisted on was getting land as part of their payment. So they got not only cash, but an awful lot of land broken up in a checkerboard arrangement like this graphic shows. Well, 1869, May 10th, we have the Golden Spike moment at Promontory in Utah. Utah has had a prominent role, sorry for the pun again, it's just fallen everywhere here, prominent role in the nation's transportation history. This photo from the Golden Spike event in 1869 is conspicuous in its absence of many of the people who really built the transcontinental rail line. And those were the Asian Americans who were prohibited from being involved in that first photo. So they just at the recent reenactment of the Golden Spike several community organizations sought to remedy that oversight. Well, those deals brought an awful lot of land into the hands of the railroad companies. Here are the corridors just through California of the railroad holdings that came from similar acts of Congress, other pieces of legislation to try to encourage railroad construction. And these are lands being held throughout the state of California. When you look across the country, this is what it looks like. And so transportation really, particularly from a private perspective, transportation has rarely been just about transportation. It's about access, being able to get to places for usually economic purposes. By the 20th century, rail lines are constructed over 240,000 miles across the country, leading to really a kind of a heyday of American railroading. But what about bicycles? Bicycles have an interesting history. I've read a bit about bicycle history, and I know that there are people in this group that know more about it than I do. But one of the things that fascinates me about bicycles and the history of bicycles is when were they created and who gets the credit for having the first bike? This is a contestable fact. So here is an early version of a proto bike called the Dandy Horse from 1820. By 1868, we've got something that looks a little bit more like a bicycle with pedals and so forth. Transit is being developed at roughly the same time. We've got our first horse-drawn streetcars in New York in the 1830s, and the first electric streetcars in Cleveland in the 1880s. And then the decimation of our streetcar lines in the mid-20th century with the so-called streetcar scandal. The car also was being developed at roughly the same time, with 1880s and the 1890s being the kind of key decades for the development of the technologies that would go into the automobile. Those technologies developed first in Europe, brought to the United States at the beginning of the 20th century, of course, flourished with the creation of the big automakers. And that resulted in car registrations going from 8,000 at the beginning of the 20th century to nearly 130 million by the end of the 20th century. So it's all about how transportation provides access to people to be able to get places and to do things. And before the creation of the steam engine in 1825, that technology, the technologies that were available at the time, walking and riding horses and moving because of the wind, really created a very compact urban environment, sometimes referred to as the pedestrian city. It's just because this is the space that you could travel within a reasonable amount of time by foot, a very compact built environment. And we can see traces of that at the first European settlers that settled in the Salt Lake Valley created a community that was based on walking principally. And so you can see in the central parts of Salt Lake the remnants of this time period. With the creation of the introduction of the railroads, we extended the pedestrian city outwards along corridors that were still pedestrian related, but used trains as a kind of transportation assist. You could get, for at least part of your trip, you could get from where you live to where you were working or vice versa very quickly for at least a portion of that trip on a railroad. But the beginning and the end of that trip would still be reliant on people walking. And so even though this expanded the amount of land that was developable and marketable for development, it still relied on walking as a key component for the daily trip. What changed after that was, after World War II, starting in 1945, we started subtracting out different modes of transportation. We had added the car, as you saw, at the turn of the 20th century, and it was part of the mix until the post-war years. You had suburbs, streetcar suburbs, railroad suburbs, where people, lived outside of the central city, but they lived in communities where they had cars, but they also rode the train and they walked. And so it was, for about a quarter century, really from 1900 to about 1925, it may be the golden era of transportation diversity, because you had all these different options, and in many communities, not all communities, but many communities, you had all these different options and you could make choices based on what made sense to you. Starting in 1945, we started to build communities where we were taking away options, where in many communities, there really was only one realistic option, and that was to drive. And that was a new thing. So I think this next graphic might have been generated by somebody on this Zoom call. And if I'm right about that, please speak up. This is a wonderful way of showing how those very abstract diagrams actually play out on a real landscape. This is Chicago, of course, and this is the Metra system map. Metra is the commuter rail operator in the Chicago area, and these are all the different commuter rail lines that emanate out from central Chicago out into the western and northern and southern suburbs. Chicago, as many of you know, is blessed by having abundant rail facilities and services available to citizens there, with so many different rail lines that it's almost hard to count. Every one of those dots is a station along each one of those lines, and every one of those stations is the hub of a community. I grew up along one of those. Well, this is a graph or an illustration that shows the development patterns of developed land around Chicago, roughly by quarter century. So starting in 1850, Chicago is just this dark part here in the center. By 1875, it has grown to include that. By 1900, it has grown in these areas here, 1925, 1950, 1969. You can see that the growth here is not concentric. It's not moving out in equally spaced rings. It's following kind of a spider web pattern, really, or an octopus pattern. And you might have inferred that maybe this pattern has something to do with the previous map, and you would be right, because there is the previous map now imposed on the development pattern map, and you can see that each one of these corridors is being served by a rail line that is providing access to lands to make them developable. What happened in between these corridors was pretty much of nothing until the post-war era. Much of the lands in between these corridors was not terribly accessible or not conveniently accessible, and so it remained empty prairie land. And then after the war, things changed. Here's one of those places, and the photos are very old, but bear with me. This is one of the new freeways that was constructed out from central Chicago out to the west. It was called the East-West Tollway at the time. When it was constructed in 1850, this is what the place that is now called Oak Brook looked like. And within 3 decades, that's what Oak Brook looked like. Oak Brook, I could show you a more modern photo, but it hasn't really changed much. The big change happened within just 30 years from that to that. Well, Salt Lake City has a similar history. And one of the things that we'll do over the course of the next several weeks is to chart some of that history. Here's a a graphic that many of you have seen before. Salt Lake City was an early adopter of streetcar technology. We had, by some counts, as much as 140, 150 miles of streetcar lines in our community. And these streetcar lines were, I mean, in ways somewhat similar to the Union Pacific. They were constructed from the perspective of land development, that the chief motivator was not so much moving people, but opening up lands for development for the creation of communities. And so these investments, private or public, in transportation technology and its application across a broad geographic scope was done in part to create communities where people could live and have good lives. And so that is a bit of our history. That, of course, is the intersection of Main Street and South Temple. Probably, I'm going to guess this is around 1930, just judging by the vehicles here. We've got a horse-drawn carriage here and some very old car. Someone out there is going to know what kind of cars these are, but I'm going to say it's probably maybe 1925 is about when this photo is taken. So that's a bit of the foundation of what we're going to be addressing in this class. As I promised, I want to go through the syllabus just briefly, and then we'll take a break and get into our first substantive presentation. I sent the syllabus out to each of you, and so I'm gathering that you've looked at it and had an opportunity to kind of at least peek at what we're up to. So I won't belabor this too much, but our schedule is we meet every Monday evening from 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock with a break in the middle. Most weeks, this week is an exception, but most weeks we will be having a guest presenter from one of the state or regional or city transportation agencies come and speak about a topic that's been listed here. And that will be the kind of the first hour of the class. Then we'll take a break, and then we'll come back after the break and work on your projects. So those presentations today, we've been covering the kind of the basics of the class. And as I mentioned before, we'll have a presentation after our break tonight from Ted Knowlton with Wasatch Front Regional Council. For next week, Andrea Olson, who's the planning director for the Utah Department of Transportation, will come and be our guest and make a presentation. On the 7th of February, Julianne Sabula, who is the strategic planning and programming manager for Salt Lake City Transportation, will come. On February 14th, GJ Labonte with UTA will be our guest. The 21st is a holiday, and so we'll be taking February 21st off, so no class on the 21st. On February 28th, Tom Millar from Salt Lake City Transportation will be here to talk about walking and biking. And then we've got a couple of weeks of project presentations where you get the microphone and the floor to tell us what you think about transportation. And we end on March 28th with a tour. TBA on the tour, we're working out the details there, but the idea is all of the class sessions up until this point will have been on Zoom. And we're hopeful that by March 28th, two things will have happened. The Omicron wave will have decreased. And so things will not be quite as scary when it comes to COVID. And the other thing is that the temperatures will be warmer. This seems like a sure bet based on prior year's experience. So this would be some sort of tour. It would be in the evening, but another thing that I think we can count on is that there will be more daylight by March 28 at 6 o'clock. And another thing based on prior year's experience, I think we can rely on that. So we're working on where that tour will be, but more on that later. I want to talk now about the projects that we're going to be working on. One of the things I've learned in a couple decades of teaching is that students don't learn very much by me just talking at them, but they learn most and they learn best by doing things, by actually taking ideas, coming up with their own ideas and applying them in some sort of real world context and something that matters to them. And so this class, being focused as it is on how to promote and nurture a group of people to be more involved in transportation decision making, our idea was, let's do this in the context of projects that our students will work on. And we're going to talk about this more next week, but what I want you to be thinking about, and maybe you already have done this, is to think about the kinds of things that you'd like to see in your community. Where are the opportunities? Where are the challenges? Where are the things that need to get addressed? Where are the things that you think could make a big difference in making your community more livable? And how might you be able to take those ideas and turn them into some sort of project, meaning an idea that you could present to someone else that might someday get inserted into some of these planning, transportation planning documents that we're going to be talking about here over the weeks. So what we'll be doing over the course of the weeks is first to identify an area of interest or concern, to explore how to gather information about that subject, to discover who is making the decision, who's responsible for that topic, and how do they make those decisions? What are the budgetary constraints or decision criteria that they have to use? And then to talk about effective ways that you can communicate your idea to just those decision makers. And then to take the final step here is to facilitate a connection between you and that agency or decision maker so that you can take your idea about what you think should happen with transportation and present it and offer it to people who are actually making decisions about transportation. It could become real. So for next week, we'll talk about this a little bit more after the next presentation, but for next week, we're going to be asking you to describe an area of interest or concern with respect to transportation, something that you think could be developed into a project idea. And then, as you see in subsequent weeks, we'll be doing that kind of that litany of steps that we just covered. Will be focused on background information, representing the project graphically, and identifying the decision maker, who is the kind of the money bags here, who has control over that particular area. Okay, so that is all I had to say on that subject, and we still have some time here. Let's throw it out for questions and discussion. Probably with a group this size, we are 46 strong here. So it probably would be easiest if people did the hand raise function like that. If you're not familiar with it, it's down along the bottom there. There's a thing called the reactions button on the far right side, just before the one that says leave. Don't push that one. Don't push it yet. But next to that is reactions. And if you've found that, raise the hand button. Who's got a question? I'm not seeing any. Wow, okay. Well, I'll ask one for you. Do I have to do a project? Oh my gosh, I thought I left school. You're not asking me to do homework gee whiz, do I have to do a project? No, you don't have to do a project. There are actually several people, 3 people last I checked, who are taking this and participating in this class for college credit. The college credit students have to do a project, okay? So let's just be clear about this. If you're getting credit for this, you got to do a project, okay? But if you're not getting college credit for this, this is just your what you call fun on a Monday evening, then, you know, this is your time. And so, you know, we don't want to chase anyone away and, you know, shame anybody into doing a project. However, this is your opportunity to take an idea, find out more about it, and maybe do something with it. And we would love to help you do that. So I'm seeing a couple things in chat. If you are feeling more comfortable and would rather put stuff in chat rather than speaking up, that's fine too. I have a question here. Do we have to decide if we're doing a project now? No. Another question is, can we work with other students on a joint project? Absolutely. Love that. So why don't we do this? Because I don't want to torture this too much. Why don't we go ahead and take a break? And Ted is signaling that he's ready to go. He's like, narrow it down, Keith, narrow it down. I can see him trying to compress things. Before we go, there's a couple things I want to share with you. You may be wondering, well, how do I conceptualize a project? You know, and I'm getting some questions here. Area of interest, spatial or topic? Yes, it could be either. Will we be presenting to decision makers or in our community, or just to the class? To decision makers in your community. We're working on that too. And you'll see some examples here, because what I was going to show you is what they do at the end of the class in Portland. I know you're going to probably get tired of hearing Portland brought into the conversation all the time. I hear about Portland fatigue in other parts of my work, but this is worth looking at. So probably I'll do 2 things here. I will show you this screen and I will provide the link to this screen in the chat so that you can get there independently. So there is the Portland is transit mecca, of course. So this is a channel on YouTube. This is for the Portland Bureau of Transportation. And now I will share the screen so you can see it, and I'll point out a couple things that I think you'll be particularly interested in. This is PBOT's, that's what they call it, Portland Bureau of Transportation. This is PBOT's channel, and so it's got all sorts of stuff on here. And you can get lost for really days watching various videos. And if you're a transportation geek like I am, be forewarned, be prepared for this. But the thing I want to point out to you are these 2 videos right here, because these 2 videos are from the Portland class most recently. They just ran their class this last semester, last fall. So they were running basically from August through December. And they capped their class off with a couple of class sessions where students presented their project ideas. And so if you want to see some ideas about what other students have done in the Portland class for their projects, these are good places to go. And so these 2 videos right here, class presentations 2, class presentations 1, it's a little spooky that every time I put the arrow over them, they start moving. I'll get used to that. I was a participant. I was a juror in the class presentations, and you can tell by the timings on these, almost 2 hours for the first one and an hour and a half for the second one. Yeah, this is a commitment of time. But you know, you can fast forward through things that don't seem interesting or effective or relevant, and so those are things that I'd suggest you take a look at if you're interested. All right, so we'll stop sharing. And yeah, Matt, I miss Portland too. But I love where I live now. I think that covers all of the questions. Anything else out there? I will unmute or unraise my hand. I guess that's called lower your hand, yes? Okay. At various times, we will be inviting you to, talk to the class, tell us your ideas, share things with us. I'm not gonna force that on you tonight, because I know that can feel a little invasive. This is one of the things about Zoom that I've learned is we're all in our homes, right? And I'm here and I'm working. This is my job, but I'm at home, right? But you're all, away from work. It's your evening. You're at home, and all of a sudden, I'm just kind of reaching in and grabbing you and trying to pull you into the conversation, and it feels really aggressive, and I don't like it. So you're going to find me hesitant to kind of call you in if you really don't want to. And so that means if you really want something to say, you have something to say, you want to get involved in the conversation, don't wait for me to call on you because it might be a long time. All right, well, I'm seeing some smiles out there. That's good. So it's by my clock here, 6:53. How about we come back right at the top of 7 o'clock? And I'll just keep the Zoom going here. You can click off, of course, and come back in, or just click off your monitors or your cameras. But we'll start the show again at 7 o'clock. So see you then. Welcome back, folks. This is part 2 of the first class session. And we're going to continue on with the kind of first really substantive presentation for the class.
Oh, it's substantive. You just wait.
Ted and I have known each other for a long time. Ted spent time in Portland. It seems like a lot of people spend time in Portland. I see Matt Grays also has a Portland connection too. And hello, Matt. It's good to see you. Ted, before moving back to Utah, worked with a legendary firm in Portland that was responsible, especially at the end of the 20th century, beginning of the 21st, for some of the most adventuresome and inventive transportation planning initiatives and analyses. And then Ted brought his expertise back home to Utah, and was a lead planner for Envision Utah for a number of years before going to work in the private sector for a stint, and then to the Wasatch Front Regional Council, one of our regional transportation planning agencies. Ted also teaches in our program, and so some of you will know Ted from his classroom, and Ted is a consummate teacher, and we are very pleased to have him teach in our program and to have him here tonight. Ted, the floor is yours.
Keith, thanks a lot. I really appreciate that. It's a lot of fun doing this with you, my friend. And it's really great to get to know you all. I think one of the big side benefits of teaching, including guest lecturing in this kind of space, is that we're building a network with each other. And I hope that you will hear the sincerity in me saying that I would really like to connect with you. So drop me a line on LinkedIn or whatever, an email or what have you. And I will also say generally that I think that one of the beauties of a class like this is it's not just in the network building, but it's also just in the development of a really well-informed citizenry. That sounds so pretentious to say that, but I think that part of the beauty in a place like Portland is that the future of that place is more of a community conversation, because there are more people that are aware of planning and that you can shape planning in Portland. And we are headed in that direction. I sincerely believe that Salt Lake City is nurturing this kind of ecosystem of a lot of people understanding how to shape the place and how to get involved. And this is a big part of that. So I'm really excited to be part of the kickoff of this. Enough of that. All right, so I'm going to talk about Wasatch Front Regional Council and this funny thing that most people don't know exists called a Metropolitan Planning Organization, an MPO. And this is the way I describe MPOs to when I'm just, I'm meeting an extended family member or a neighbor, and I try to explain to them what I do. I say, well, let's say you have a group of communities, you have 5 cities, and there is a need or a desire to have, you fill in the blank, a major road, a trail, a new transit line, and it's going to extend across all of those cities. How do you go about making that decision? How would you, if you were one of those cities, try to negotiate with the other 5 cities? How would you do that? You follow me? So the purpose of a metropolitan planning organization in a nutshell is to do something that is inherently not local. That is, work out transportation planning solutions that are interjurisdictional, cross jurisdictions, jurisdictional lines, easy for me to say. So the federal government authorized the creation and called for the creation of metropolitan planning organizations back in the early 60s. And this is the technical language. They did that to ensure that they wanted the sense that, hey, look, if we're going to give federal transportation dollars to a location, we want to know that there has been careful thought about how that money is spent, and that thought in turn was based on involving the affected communities in a comprehensive, cooperative, continuing process, a 3C process. Okay, so that's their idea. Wasatch Regional Council was founded in the early 70s, about the same time that I was born. So that's why we have this close connection. When you hear that phrase, Wasatch Regional Council, that is the name of our organization. It's also the name of the board, okay? The board, all MPOs have serve a policy-making function. They're governed by a board of local, state, federal government, and transportation authorities coming together, okay? I think I've got this in a later slide, I do, about what our board looks like. So every MPO is an urbanized area of 50,000 or more. All of those urbanized areas now across the United States have a metropolitan planning organization. And every MPO is, it's governed by that body, that decision-making body. It also has to follow the guidelines that are laid out in a federal transportation reauthorization bill. Now, we just passed one late in 2021. You heard a lot about it. It's the infrastructure bill. The formal name is Investing in Infrastructure and Jobs Act, or IJA. They need like a cute mascot or something. So if you have any thoughts on that, that would be great. And one of the things that MPOs do in their planning is they have to demonstrate that plans will meet air quality standards. This is my ugliest slide. This is not what slides should look like. Don't worry, they're not all this bad. Okay, so the Wasatch Regional Council, the council is both the organization and the board, 19 local elected officials, 27 members. I can give you the gory details, but the basic notion is half of that membership are picked by the individual local governments. They select their membership, and the other half is picked by the remainder the overall board to be geographically diverse. Now, one of our primary product or thing that we produce as an organization is the Regional Transportation Plan. The phrase of that, the name of it might vary a little bit one metro area to another. We call it the Regional Transportation Plan. The basic idea with the Regional Transportation Plan is it is the place where significant transportation projects are born. Okay, I-15 was born here, maybe not, but certainly the widening of I-15 was born here. TRAX was born in the Regional Transportation Plan, the Mountain View Corridor, okay, etc., are born in the Regional Transportation Plan. In fact, UDOT and UTA really cannot build anything unless it's in the Regional Transportation Plan. The federal government recognizes that plan, but also UDOT and UTA recognize it wholeheartedly as well. So it unifies us behind one plan that rules them all, kind of like the Lord of the Rings, only it's nothing at all like that. Now, I don't know, I think I'm behind, Keith. I'm going to maybe speed up just a touch, but WFRC does something that is unusual. It's not unique, but it is unusual among metropolitan planning organizations. And that is that we, as we plan transportation facilities adopted by our board, we do that in conjunction with a conversation about how land development will change. Now, let me explain. A lot of MPOs, they'll say, our job isn't land use planning. Dear local governments, give us your land use plans. We'll gather them together. We'll forecast the future based on those plans, and then we'll match a transportation system to those plans. So it's one direction. Land use is fixed, and transportation serves that land use. We have the conversation about the two of them correlating with each other. And we can do that because we serve the very local governments that do the land use planning themselves. And so we call the name for that coordinated process Wasatch Choice. All right, so when you hear the phrase Wasatch Choice, the Wasatch Choice vision, you know that that is Regional Transportation Plan plus local land use visioning coming together into a coordinated document. Hopefully that makes sense. Now, the Wasatch Choice is a goal-driven plan. So really, regional plans are always goal-driven, but often the goals that drive a transportation plan can be incredibly narrow. They can be as narrow as we want to reduce traffic congestion. That's a good goal, but what are the other impacts on quality of life that we want to attend to, right? So this is a simplification of our goal structure, which is, we're worrying about health and the economy, moving people, and also accessibility, access to destinations that Keith talked about, as well as just the health and quality of community-oriented communities. A tangent or an aside, whatever. I think one of the big things that citizens don't do enough of, that they really should understand, is that the extent to which you can affect goals in a regional transportation plan, or goals in an environmental impact statement, or goals in a general plan, you can have a really big impact on the outcome of a plan if you affect the goals, right? So a lot of times people think, well, my play is I want to affect projects. Okay, fine. I understand that that might be the ultimate objective, is to shape what actually gets built. But when you back up and you change the rubric upon which decisions are made, that's the goal structure, you often end up downstream affecting a lot of what gets put in place. All right. So I just wanted to do that one little pitch there. Now, so when we're talking about Wasatch Choice, this is the framework of Wasatch Choice. You can see the link on the lower left there, wfrc.org / I won't read the rest of it for shared sanity. But Wasatch Choice is, I'm going to illustrate kind of the layers in this. And I'll do it with Sullett County. And so I've zoomed into Sullett County, even though Wasatch Choice covers Brigham City on the north down all the way through till Santa Quinn, okay? It includes the roadway system. This is a picture of 2050. So this is existing plus planned. This includes the formal lines that are in the regional transportation plan, the transit system, bus rapid transit and rail. High capacity transit is the phrase we use. Active transportation, this is the framework for active transportation. Active transportation is the industry terminology for if it's human powered, right? So bicycle, scooters, walking, wheelchairs, etc. And then the conversation that we have with local governments on the land use, we focus on the framework for land use, or put another way, these are areas of change. These are places where communities say, you know, we're the fastest growing state the last 10 years. Where are the locations where we want to allow growth to occur on an ongoing basis, even if we are a built out community? And they identify these places, centers of growth, that they purposefully have in their head, hey, these are locations where we'd love to enhance and improve the transportation network and encourage more growth to happen. That's the marriage there. Parks and open space is a component of Wasatch Choice that, I'll be honest, is not well developed. And I think that we could do better on the parks and open space planning in Utah. But Wasatch Choice brings all those together into a framework. If you go to that website, what you would see is it's a zoomable map. A community can zoom in, they can click on any feature, get all of the gory details, and it is intended to have a level of detail that can inform a general plan at a community level, zooming out to regional planning quality. So that's the idea with Wasatch Choice. When we're talking about the transportation element, right? It's kind of like a general plan. You think of Wasatch Choice as the overall general plan for the region. When you go just to the regional transportation plan, the transportation element, that includes active transportation, that's the little bike icon, roadways, public transportation, coordinated with land use. It is, I assume that you've been able to see all of my slides, or somebody would have said something. We update this on a 4-year cycle. It's financially constrained. Basic idea here is we forecast out the amount of revenue that we believe will be available for transportation out over the planning horizon, in our case, out to 2050, that 30-year planning horizon. And then we establish a plan that lives within those projected needs, which I think is a very sound way to do that. And we conform to air quality standards. That's that thing. And then we phase the plan. So we establish buckets on a 10-year basis to prioritize that which will get built first. So UDOT can't really build something unless it is in phase 1. Now, we don't get into more detail than that because there's lots of steps in transportation planning that occur after the regional transportation plan. In some cases, quite a lot of detail after the regional transportation plan. So this is, what are the general corridors? What's the general project idea? What's the generally what modes, and the approximate time frame. That's within the regional transportation plan. Now, have you heard of the Unified Transportation Plan? Utah's award-winning Unified Transportation Plan? I can't see you at all anyway, so I can't tell if you're nodding or whatever you're doing. But we're the only state, I believe, still in the country where all of the transportation planning entities that are regional and state come together to produce a unified document, unified product. So WFRC's the biggest MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization, but there's Cache in Cache County. South of us, there's Mountain Land Association of Governments, Dixie in Washington County. Don't know if they're going to go through a name change. And then outside of the metropolitan areas, which are those blue polygons, UDOT does the planning for the rural part of the state. And all of us coordinate with our transit authorities. Obviously, by far the biggest transit authority is UTA. And so UTA is a key player. We also check in as a group with Cache and Suntran as well. So we come together, Utah's Unified Transportation Plan. So Wasatch Choice, in the Wasatch front, the transportation element is our regional transportation plan. That then gets incorporated into Utah's Unified Transportation Plan. I can get into the details of that if you want to, but for the sake of time, I'm not going to talk a lot about it. Now, what is our role versus UDOT and UTA? So this is a spectrum of creating ideas and organizing them into a picture of what a desired outcome is, visioning, planning, working out the details for accomplishing that visioning. Programming is, what needs to be done first or second. How are we going to spend funds to advance projects? That's programming. Construction, operation, those are self-explanatory. MPOs or our MPO, it varies a little bit based on MPO. We do visioning, planning, and we do programming of a piece of funding. I think it's approximate to $80 million a year. That's not a lot of money in transportation world. Meanwhile, UDOT does programming of a lot more money. They engage in some planning, and of course they work in construction and operations much more fully. And this is a little bit not quite right for UTA to explain it this way, but UTA does some planning and certainly does a lot of construction and operation. It's kind of a rudimentary graphic, but hopefully it gives you some sense. So I explain it that essentially WFRC works with UDOT and UTA, works for local governments, develops the regional transportation plan. It's adopted by a board primarily of elected officials. Then the baton is handed over to UDOT and UTA to do, when it's needed, more refined planning, and then to go down that process of construction and operation. I'm looking at the chat bar finally. And Carla, you asked about, is it state or federal air quality standards? Those are federal air quality standards. And here's a little picture on transportation funding. So these are the sources: federal, orange, blue state, green is local. And also you can see the relative size. So for state roads, those are the funding sources and the size of the budget. Local roads, it gives you a sense of it. Public transportation or transit and what that component is. Honestly, we need to develop the active transportation piece of this. It would be very small. I'm just being honest. However, it's changed and I think increased a substantial, meaning relative to what it was before, it's notably bigger under the Investing in Infrastructure and Jobs Act, but it still is a really small amount, especially when you compare our country to a lot of our peer countries. Now, public involvement, I'm just crossing my fingers that in a few minutes, somebody doesn't say, Ted, you've been on mute for like 20 minutes. So I don't, what did you even say? Just one person say something.
We can hear you.
Okay, all right.
And not only can we hear you, but you sound like you know something. This is really impressive, Ted.
Okay, all right, well, good. I've been working on that.
Ted talks with his hands a lot, so I was just following his hands.
I talk a lot with my hands. Keith will remember the old Twilight Zone. This is going to be a Twilight Zone episode. You know, of you're on mute. You're on mute constantly. You love talking. Anyway, public involvement. I will be honest. Before I get into it, man, we get confronted with a very apathetic, broad populace when it comes to our planning. I wish it wasn't the case. Hopefully this starts to change it. I think the broader public doesn't understand the impact that, I'll put it this way, Utah's Unified Transportation Plan actually has. And I think pound for pound, a bit of engagement early in the transportation planning process, in other words, when MPOs pull together plans, can really pay off. And I would love it. Okay. Remember, 4-year transportation planning cycle. Every 4 years is a little different. So this is a general sense though. Year 1, visioning, scenario planning, goal setting. Year 2, starting to drill down into, well, what transportation projects make sense based on that vision and scenario and those goals, transportation projects. 3rd year, let's prioritize those projects. This is a gross simplification. We're in that 3rd year. We're in this, we're just leaving the transportation project identification. It's not too late. But we're getting into the prioritization of projects, and that's the space that we're in for public engagement. And then in the 4th year, in a lot of ways, it's kind of not a big public engagement year, and that would be what is wrong with me in my years? What in the world? So I'm 2 years off completely. This should be 2020 is the 1st year. 2021 is the 2nd year. 2022, this year, is in yellow, and 2023 is the last year. So I don't know what happened there. So sorry for that.
Is the Twilight Zone, Ted?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, you said something about a Twilight Zone, but
Public engagement, yet another ugly slide, but the very first thing to do is go to this web address and give us your contact information. We will do it anyway if you do that, but you might also just say, please put me on the newsletter list. That at a minimum, you'll get more correspondence from us that will detail any engagement opportunity that we have. We have an annual summer open house that was especially pre-COVID, but we do have Zoom-based open houses. I don't know if there's a name for that. We should come up with a name for that. But these are each year, and we do that to double duty. We get input on the regional transportation plan and on the transportation improvement program, or how dollars are being programmed out to fund improvements. I know this is a lot to take in, but so there's the regional transportation plan, regionally significant major transportation improvements. The transportation improvement program addresses some of those and a whole lot of little tiny projects, relatively speaking, that local governments have put forward and nominated. All right, so you're kind of getting the big enchilada and the side dish Okay, it didn't work at all in that annual summer open house. Okay, now you can also attend any open WFRC meeting, and basically they're all open. They're all open to the public. There will be formal public comment openings in many, but not all of those. All of them can be attended. Public comment will be clearly labeled if it is being sought. Here is the link for that. So you can track when those are going to occur. We have only 5 council meetings a year, and I didn't put it in here, but we have a whole committee structure. When you go to that, you'll see all of the different committees. The main committee is the Wasatch Front Regional Council. You can also inquire about participating. You can always attend these, but we can potentially put you on the formal invite list for advisory committees. Okay, we have a handful of different advisory committees, and by the way, we're in the process of adding more, including one on equity. Okay, so we have an active transportation committee, we have regional growth committee, technical advisory committees, equity advisory committee. That's not the actual acronym, but you can inquire about that. Even if you're not invited to be a formal participant, you can always attend. And right now, and for the last couple of years, all of our meetings have been by Zoom, and so they're really easy to pop into. Now, I don't know what you think about that, but you know, that's a little bit, it takes a little bit of effort to get involved in this kind of structure. Here's what we have seen and experienced on our side. I don't think that this is not a sufficient excuse. I'm just explaining what we get. We have before tried lots of different ways to reach out to the public. Well before COVID hit, we did an online big forum. We sent out a bunch of links. We're all excited. People can just be at home in their pajamas and zoom in. We got a few people. We had all the cameras set up. Not one person. Not one. We had nobody. Actually, I think we had one person. I want to say his name was Bob. It wasn't Bob. I just like that idea that we hung out with Bob for 2 hours. And this is the kind of thing that we run into. We don't want that. I think that we'd have better plans if we had people involved. Maybe we did something, maybe nachos needed to be involved. I don't really know, but it didn't work. So we've kind of reverted to what we do a lot is we work a lot with local government, and we go to them and we say, you got to tell us what you think. We work for you. Now tell us what you think. We also have this big committee structure. Nothing would make me happier than real public engagement that we respond to and nurture. And by the way, if you have ideas, maybe not right this second, but love to hear if you have, I've seen this in another region or Portland, where they've done something really brilliant. And I think that that's probably good for today. I'm going to stop sharing.
Wow, Ted, that is awesome. Awesome. Some of you who are familiar with the way transportation gets planned around here will appreciate how much Ted has covered just within a space of a half an hour. He's really the entire world of transportation planning brought to you in just 30 quick minutes, and all its details and intricacies. So that was just fabulous work. So this is the Q&A time, and that's what we're going to do for the next 5 minutes or 10 minutes or however long it seems to want to go, and then we'll bring this to a close at a reasonable time. So I'll start off with a question, Ted.
Okay.
I have a project that I have been, obsessed with for a long time now. And that is the reconstruction, kind of renovation of Foothill Boulevard to make it better for transit. Foothill Boulevard is I don't know if it still has this ranking, but for a long time it was ranked as the most congested corridor in the entire region, in the entire state, and particularly during peak period. And so I look at that and I think this is where we need good transit. So how does one think about something that is very specific, it's very local? I mean, the entire corridor is within one city, and yet it is, I believe, a link in the regional transportation plan. How does one track a project like that through a regional transportation plan?
How do you track a project like that? Yeah, I mean, I think for starters, maybe this is an obvious thing, but regional transportation plans, when they're updated, it's not starting from scratch. It's refining what was there before. Get to know what's on the plan right now. Should we do this? Let's pull it up. I'm a little afraid, but let's just see what happens.
Be brave.
Okay. So, and this will also maybe give you a sense of how to navigate this. So we've tried to make this really simple. So you go to the Wasatch Choice map. This is integrated graphical interface. So when you click on the transportation tab, you're now looking at the regional transportation plan. Let's turn off roads and bike ped so that we can just see. Well, we'll do everything for the Foothill Boulevard corridor. So we click on that. For road, what's in the plan now is to add hot lane and public transportation. GJ probably knows all the details. Are you on here, GJ? But so there's.
I am, Ted, and I'm expecting you to get to the point where Keith was coming from. When you say track, this particular project has been tracked for a very, very long time.
Yes, so I'm going into too much detail here, but you're right. So start with what is in place now. Foothill Boulevard. Should we get into some of the details? The problem and challenge with Foothill Boulevard is it's been planned how many times, GJ?
Oh,
8 times?
Yeah, I think at least that many, and I've seen half as many studies done.
Yeah, well, and that's because something needs to change with it, and I can't figure it out. But plans will be made, sometimes very good, and they never get advanced. I don't really know why. Keith, even in your introduction to that project, you noted it's all within one community. This is a really interesting hybrid where if you are interested in shaping what happens with Foothill Boulevard, you would want to try influencing the regional transportation plan and your local government at the same time. But it's also a UDOT roadway, which is part of the complexity. It's owned by UDOT. And I mean, and every mode needs to utilize it because it serves that clear desire line to the University of Utah, and it connects you even south of I-80. So it has so many natural advantages, but it's just this limited right of way that's really pretty difficult or prohibitively expensive to widen. So the challenge is always, well, how do you deal with that right of way? Keith, I'm going off the rails here. So what would you add on this?
I think it's this GJ again. I think it's a great example, Ted. when you talk about the influence of land use on transportation networks, I mean, that's it. You are dealing with a, mixed use commercial retail and on one side, and then single family homes on the other.
Yeah.
Well, thanks,
Yeah.
Ted. I was trying to throw you a softball there because this one is a really thorny problem. It's an easy one to ridicule because it's been so intractable for so long. But it's because of the geographic and topographic limitations, the fact that it is a UDOT facility, but it's within one city, and the fact that it's basically everyone has to use it if you're in that part of the region. There are very few alternatives, and so it's it is transit, it is active transportation, it is car oriented, and so this is a great example. But I'm glad that you were able to show us how to click through in the interactive part of the plan. Thank you. Christy, you've got your hand raised. Let's hear from you.
And my question goes back to what you were talking about funding in your presentation. It just makes it, I guess my question is, what is the flexibility there? And the reason I ask that is because you make it sound like, okay, well, we planned out every pot of money, basically excluding all other possibilities. At least that's how it sounds like, okay, well, this is the mighty plan. And so if your transportation project or what you're looking at isn't in here, isn't named out, and isn't in phase 1 or whatever phase we're in, and it's not going to get the money because we've accounted for every pot of money that could possibly go to transportation. So I guess what I'm asking is, what is the flexibility, or what is the possibility of getting something funded that I don't want to say exactly is outside the plan, because I know those plans can get pretty granular and almost lots of things could be included. But is there flexibility if it's not a big dog in phase 1 and, well, that's just not going to get funding?
Well, let me first clarify that we called it grand term Utah's Unified Transportation Plan, and then I even showed that graphic about local funding of local projects. But the reality is the Unified Transportation Plan does not address the details of local projects. It only addresses the details of regional projects. So your community might have smaller projects that it needs to get funded, and those typically do not have to be on the regional transportation plan. If for some reason they do need to, for whatever pots of money need to be sought, we have a process of amending the plan. And so we work with local governments. If they need to get something on the plan, we will consider it against the goals having to be adopted by our board, but it doesn't mean that you have to wait 4 years to get that amendment. But an important thing is that not every project at every scale is on the regional transportation plan. Now, here's another thing. Utah funding is pretty siloed. The ability to move money from sales tax funds and gas tax funds, and then spend them on public transportation or trails, you basically cannot do that. So not all of our money is siloed, but compared to a lot of other states, we have money that is earmarked for particular modes. And as an MPO, we do not have the authority to overcome that. Those are state law changes that would need to be put in place.
All right, thank you. Troy, you have a question.
Yes, thank you. I was just wondering, I know you help fund a lot of the local community active transportation plans. I was just curious, how do the local active transportation plans interrelate to the local active transportation portions of your Wasatch Front regional transportation plan? How are they connected at all?
Yes, excellent question. And active transportation, that layer, that set of projects is different, not just because of the mode, it's different than the road and the transit sets of projects, because a lot of those projects are really small, and really the details of that planning is fundamentally local. Not entirely, but what we do is we take more of the local suite of plans, we bring them together, we coordinate them. We might elevate some regionally significant projects, but that layer is really borne by local government, whereas the other two layers are not really borne by local government. They're more kind of blessed and informed by local government. Did that answer your question?
It does. Thank you so much.
Hello, Lucas.
Hey, I'm curious if there are any plans for kind of interregional transportation planning other than just automobile transportation planning, because it seems like there are a few private companies running shuttles, but I'm curious, like, if there were plans, and if so, kind of who takes that over? Because, you know, like you pointed out, you're only over the Wasatch Front, which is a huge region, but, you know, what if we're looking at shuttles between the Wasatch Front and Moab and the Wasatch Front and St. George, and et cetera?
So in the case of public transportation, you know, between two states or between two metro areas that are not connected, there has been some talk about doing that, and it's not my area of expertise, nor is it something that our organization has meaningfully engaged in. But there continues to be a lot of talk about it, and you know, in some of our peer states, California and Texas, interregional public transportation connections have been worked on. That tends to be outside of the MPO story where that occurs. I think it's a good idea to explore that for sure. It's just not something that we have really worked on a lot in Utah. And GJ, or anybody else, I don't know if you want to comment on that.
I was just going to throw in there that's part of what the unified plan is intended to do, is to think about Utah as a kind of an entire transportation network. But yeah, there's a little bit more complexity there relative to funding sources and jurisdiction. And I can't tell you how many times we've heard the request to build a train to Wendover. But
Carla, welcome to the
Oh, I was just
conversation.
gonna, Keith, just one more thing. I noticed Christy added in the chat some federal funding. And Christy, I think you're referring to the coordinated mobility projects on this. And so these are some shuttle options that UDOT and UTA work with community members, primarily those who have disabilities or are veterans or elderly and need some special assistance. So yeah, thanks for mentioning that, Christy.
Yeah, so I was just going to ask if there's a requirement to meet federal air quality standards, why is there such an emphasis on the automobile rather than active transportation and public transportation and things like that? I mean, I'm just thinking up in Cache Valley, how we have this great new MPO road going through Hyde Park, but yet, you know, not a lot is talked about as far as active transportation, even though Cache Valley has some of the worst air quality in the nation.
Well, this is a really tricky and excellent question. And, you know, I think you could talk about it we could go down this rabbit hole a lot, but let me leave you with this conundrum. I'll go into character. We can't pay for that transit line / active transportation facility because nobody will use it. Why would we pay for that when nobody will use it? Models will say, oh, you want to build that transit line? Well, our forecast is Bob and his 2 families will use that. And that's it. Now, obviously I'm being just stupid here, but but it goes back to land use. If we don't have a land use ecosystem, that would mean that a transit line or a trail would benefit from significant use, then you can put it on a map, but the models will say, you know, it's not having a significant air quality problem. And then you could take that the opposite way. Well, how do we engender transit supportive land use if we can't get the transit line on the map, dear Ted? How are we supposed to get transit oriented development without the transit? This is the chicken and egg that I think somebody mentioned in the chat bar. And that chicken and the egg is part of the concept of the Wasatch Choice approach. Is, okay, you're both right. You're both right. You need the transit line planned before you're willing to change your land use. And the land use has to be planned before the transit line can get built. Can we pinky swear that we're going to do them together? You go change your general plan and work on your zoning. We'll work on the project. Oh yeah, we did it. That's the
Yeah,
concept.
I mean, yeah, I think a lot of, like I think about what we were doing down with the Salt Lake Chamber, and when we were talking about Frontrunner and launching that, and the connection from Pleasant View to down to Utah County, and all that went on there, and then the transit oriented development kind of had to follow along behind it in a lot of ways. You saw Murray and South Salt Lake, and now you're seeing the Granary District and so many other places that it's like, which do we do first, and it's, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know the better answer.
I don't even have time to elaborate on this, but I think on the bike side, it's not that we need different land use necessarily. It's that I think that we need a high quality network before people really start to go whole hog into bicycle use. And so it's like we need to get a relatively mature, very safe network in place, and then we'll start to see the utilization take off.
Yeah, I agree.
So Trevor, you get our last question tonight. Those people who've got questions in the chat, if we haven't gotten to them, we're gonna bring them forward into next week's class session. So do not distress. We will get to those questions. We'll start off with those next week. But Trevor, the last word.
Hey, Ted.
Hey,
so
Trevor,
I'm sure you're familiar. Yeah, you do. Thanks for teaching us. So I'm sure you're familiar with the Rio Grande plan. So even though it's entirely within Salt Lake, it's probably regionally significant.
It is,
so if that ever becomes a reality, how, if at all, would WFRC be involved?
Yeah, that would benefit a lot by inclusion in the regional transportation plan. Trevor, it probably is better for you to do this than for me to do it. Do you want to tell everybody just 2 sentences of what the Rio Grande plan is?
Sure. It's an idea to underground the railroads downtown between like 1st South and 9th South. So it'd be the Union Pacific lines and the Frontrunner lines, and then have all that space open up for development. Yeah,
and so it has it's a project idea that has a lot of merit, and also makes a lot of people nervous. And the nervousness kind of goes by, well, I'm getting into the substantive details on it. The bottom line is this is the kind of tricky project that has lots of upside, but it's innovative. This is the kind of thing that you get when you have real public engagement. I don't think the transportation industry would have come up with this project. It's a cool project. It has merit. Whether or not it has enough merit to get built, I'm not commenting on that, but at least has an upside to worth explore. This is a tricky one where here's part of the challenge. A lot of the calculus when you do a transit project is cost versus ridership. How much does it cost? How many people will ride it? This one is tricky because a big part of the calculus of it is also development, economic development. So you go back to your goal statement. What are we looking at? What are we rewarding? What are we seeking to reward? Riders and low cost, both good things. Are we also bringing in economic opportunity? How do we even value that within our transportation planning process? That's the tricky rub for that particular project. Great question.
So the award for the best quote goes to Austin. Austin writes in the chat, "You can't judge the demand for a bridge by how many people are swimming across the river."
That's a good one. Yep, I like that a lot too.
I think that's a great way to reflect what we in the transportation field sometimes refer to as induced demand. You know, that the capacity itself is generating the demand, and sometimes you can't model it. So, but more on that subject and many other subjects when we meet next week at 6 o'clock in this same space. Before we go, there is a to-do here. If you will, I'm not going to bring it on the screen, but it's in your syllabi. For next week, we've got a reading, which is the Utah's Transportation Vision. This is in preparation for the presentation by Andrea Olson from UDOT. And we have for your projects by next week, we're asking by noon next Monday so that we can prepare it for class. If you could shoot an email to either me or Matt, and our email addresses are at the top of the syllabus, with just a few words about what you're interested in transportation, what you're concerned about in transportation, what you think might turn into a project for the class. Maybe you haven't figured out how that interest or that concern can be turned into a project. That's fine. You don't have to fully vet it, but just something that will give us something to work with next week during our second hour as we go through and kind of take your ideas, take your concerns, your interests, and reduce them into some sort of project concept. Maybe you're already there. Maybe you want some mentoring to get there, and we'll work on it next week. But send us your ideas and your concerns. Send them to us by email by noon next Monday, and we'll be all set to go for next week's class session. Well, we're going to finish on time here and on budget too. I'm really excited about that part. And I want to thank our guest presenters tonight, to Ted and to Laura. And thank you so much for getting us started with such a inspiring and substantive set of ideas and lots of background information. As I said, if you put something into the chat and we didn't get to it, we will. If not at next week's class, perhaps in an email. I know there's a couple questions on ways to get involved in various ways. I see your chat, Cristobal, and we will get to that, as well as to the other comments. So thanks again, and welcome to the Wasatch Transportation Academy. And I can't wait to see you again next week.